The lights blazed hot in the packed political debate hall as actor Jonathan Roumie stepped up to the microphone, his dark suit sharp against the dark backdrop, eyes focused with an intense, calm conviction on the man sitting across from him. Senator Ted Cruz had just finished a 15-minute speech about the seriousness of Washington politics and the need for seasoned, battle-tested leadership, his voice resonating with practiced gravitas. His confident smile suggested he thought he delivered a knockout punch to the unexpected challenger from the world of arts. The air in the room was thick with anticipation. Political insiders, journalists, and party donors filled every seat, their phones already recording what they expected to be another routine political exchange. The moderator had framed this as a discussion about leadership and authenticity, but everyone in the room knew this was really about traditional power versus a new kind of influence, establishment politics versus a voice from beyond the Beltway. Cruz's performance had been vintage Cruz, articulate, aggressive, and designed to assert intellectual dominance. He'd used his considerable rhetorical skill to command the stage, his voice echoing through the hall as he positioned himself as the seasoned statesman ready to school the acclaimed actor. But what happened next left everyone in that room completely speechless. Cruz leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, waiting for what he assumed would be a stammering, perhaps overly emotional response from the 48-year-old performer. The audience of political insiders, journalists, and activists held their breath. This was supposed to be Cruz's moment to reassert his relevance and gravitas, especially after recent national controversies. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. Cameras focused on both figures, Cruz confident and expectant, Roumie calm and calculating. You could hear the quiet hum of the air conditioning, the subtle shuffle of people shifting in their seats, the barely audible click of phone cameras capturing what everyone assumed would be a routine political moment. Instead, Roumie delivered one line that not only silenced Cruz, but sent shockwaves through the entire political establishment. A line so perfectly crafted, so brutally effective, that it would trend nationwide within minutes and leave Cruz scrambling for a comeback that never came. Before we dive deep into this cultural and political earthquake, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss the latest dramatic confrontations that are reshaping America. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. The tension in that room was electric. Cruz thought he was about to school an entertainer. Instead, he was about to learn why underestimating Jonathan Roumie might be the biggest mistake of his political career. To understand why this moment was so devastating, you need to know exactly who these two public figures are and what brought them to this explosive confrontation. Jonathan Roumie represents everything the old political guard fears about a new kind of public influence. At 48, he's a globally recognized actor, profound in his convictions, and absolutely fearless when it comes to challenging established power structures with a different kind of authority. Born and raised in New York, he worked his way through various roles, honed his craft, and then made history as a central figure in one of the most widely watched and spiritually impactful series of all time. But here's what makes Roumie truly dangerous to people like Cruz. He's not intimidated by anyone. Through his work, he's connected with millions of people, understanding human struggles and aspirations on a deeply personal level. He learned early that in a system designed to highlight political division, genuine empathy and authentic communication could cut through the noise. His rise to global prominence was meteoric. He didn't just portray characters, he embodied them in a way that resonated universally. His public appearances became legendary for their thoughtful insights and moral clarity. Political veterans warned newcomers, never underestimate the man who can deliver profound truth in a single glance. Ted Cruz, on the other hand, represents the old political establishment, trying desperately to maintain its traditional dominance. The seasoned Texas senator built his reputation as a brilliant orator and a tough-talking conservative who could demolish opponents with aggressive rhetoric and legalistic precision. For years, his formula worked. His viral moments of debating constitutional law and challenging political rivals made him a media staple and a feared debater. But Cruz's star had faced its own challenges. His presidential campaigns, while robust, ultimately failed to capture the ultimate prize. His association with various national controversies and perceived shifts in loyalty had damaged his credibility with some segments of the public. At 53, he was increasingly seen as a traditional politician, trying to reclaim yesterday's glory through familiar battlegrounds. This debate was supposed to be Cruz's moment to reassert his intellectual and political command. The topic was leadership in times of crisis, and Cruz's team felt confident this would be the perfect opportunity for him to remind everyone why seasoned political experience matters. The format allowed for extended remarks, which played to Cruz's strength of dominating conversations through logical arguments and forceful delivery. What Cruz didn't anticipate was that Roumie had been preparing for this moment his entire career, not in politics, but in understanding the human condition and connecting with global audiences. He'd observed political tactics, knew the vulnerabilities of purely rhetorical battles, and understood exactly how to turn the focus from political gamesmanship to genuine public service. The stakes couldn't have been higher. For Cruz, this was about proving he still mattered at the highest echelons of conservative politics. For Roumie, it was about showing that a different kind of public voice, rooted in authenticity and universal values, wouldn't be bullied or silenced by old-school intimidation tactics. The audience that night included major political donors, party leaders, and media personalities who would shape the narrative about both figures for years to come. Everyone understood they were watching a clash of philosophies that would define how public discourse is conducted in modern America. The debate had been building tension for over an hour before the moment that would change everything. Cruz had been in his element, using his trademark aggressive yet intellectual style to dominate the conversation. He interrupted other panelists, raised his voice to command attention, and used his precise language to dismiss anyone who dared challenge him on traditional political terms. "Let me tell you something about real leadership," Cruz began, his voice booming across the hall as he stood up from his chair. "I've served in the United States Senate, dealt with complex legislation, stood against entrenched bureaucracies, and fought for conservative principles in the highest courts. I've negotiated with presidents and challenged foreign adversaries." The audience was listening intently. This was classic Cruz, positioning himself as the experienced adult in the room while subtly diminishing everyone else's credentials, especially in actors. But then Cruz made a critical error. Instead of staying focused on his own record, he decided to go for a direct, dismissive attack. "And then we have people like Mr. Roumie," he said, turning to face him directly. "Fresh faces with fresh ideas about public engagement, but no real understanding of how government actually works. No experience making the tough decisions that keep Americans safe and prosperous, only playing them on a screen." Roumie remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable. But those who knew him recognized the signs: a slight tightening of the jaw, a deep, calm focus in his eyes. He was loading the chamber. "I respect the enthusiasm of those who wish to contribute," Cruz continued, emboldened by what he misread as intimidation. "But governing isn't about inspiring moments or viral videos. It's about intricate policy, legal frameworks, and knowing how to work the system to get results. It's not about acting, it's about action." Several audience members nodded approvingly. Cruz's allies in the crowd began to murmur their agreement. This seemed to be going exactly as Cruz had planned. "When you're dealing with international crises, you can't learn on the job," Cruz pressed on, now pacing slightly as his confidence grew. "You need someone who's been tested, who's proven they can handle pressure, who's earned their seat at the table through decades of public service." The moderator tried to give Roumie a chance to respond, but Cruz wasn't finished. "I've watched too many well-meaning individuals get chewed up and spit out by Washington because they thought passion could replace preparation. They thought good intentions could substitute for good judgment." His voice grew louder, more condescending. "The American people deserve leaders who've already made their mistakes in smaller roles, not in the Senate, where the stakes are life and death." Now Cruz was hitting his stride. This was the kind of performance that had made him famous. The intellectually superior, experienced tough guy putting the newcomer in their place. He could feel the energy in the room shifting in his favor. "Don't get me wrong," Cruz said, his tone becoming almost paternal. "Mr. Roumie seems like a sincere person. Intelligent, well-meaning, but sincerity doesn't negotiate trade deals. Well-meaning doesn't prevent cyber attacks. Intelligence without real-world political experience is just untested theory." The audience was fully engaged now. Some were nodding along with Cruz's points. Others were waiting to see how Roumie would respond to this systematic dismantling of his credibility as a public voice. Cruz decided to land what he thought would be the knockout punch. "I've been in rooms where the decisions affect millions of lives. I've had to make choices that kept me awake at night. I've earned every gray hair on my head through real leadership in real crises." He paused for dramatic effect, looking directly at Roumie. "That's the difference between us. I've been tested by fire." He's still playing with scripts. The room erupted in murmurs. Cruz's supporters applauded loudly. Even some neutral observers seemed impressed by the rhetorical power of his closing metaphor. Cruz sat back down, visibly satisfied with his performance. He'd systematically questioned Roumie's experience, expertise, and readiness for high-level public discourse. In his mind, he just delivered a masterclass in political debate. The moderator turned to Roumie. "Mr. Roumie, would you like to respond?" Cruz leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, that familiar, confident smile spreading across his face. He just spent 15 minutes establishing himself as the adult in the room. What could this actor, who portrays biblical figures, possibly say to recover from such a thorough takedown? Roumie stood slowly, walked to the microphone, and looked directly at Cruz. The room fell completely silent. What happened next would be replayed millions of times across social media and remembered as one of the most devastating public comebacks in modern American history. Jonathan Roumie stood at the microphone for exactly 3 seconds of complete silence. The audience held its breath. Cruz's smile widened, interpreting his pause as nervousness. Then he spoke. "Senator Cruz, you talk about being tested by fire, but the only thing I've seen you get burned by is a flight to Cancun." The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The entire room was processing what had just happened. Then the explosion began. The audience erupted in shocked laughter, gasps, and applause. Cruz's face went through a spectrum of colors: confusion, realization, then deep red embarrassment. His mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time in his public career, Ted Cruz was completely speechless. But Roumie wasn't done. "You want to talk about experience? Let me tell you about real experience. While you were navigating legislative maneuvers for political gain, I was connecting with the human spirit on a global stage, grappling with profound truths. While you were cozying up to power brokers, I was working 18-hour days to deliver stories that offer hope and understanding to millions of diverse people." The Cancun reference had hit like a lightning bolt, but now Roumie was building a systematic case that turned Cruz's entire argument on its head. "You say I haven't been tested, Senator Cruz. I've been tested every single day of my career. Every time I had to embody profound human suffering and hope, I was tested. Every time I had to stand for a message of compassion in a cynical world, I was tested. Every time I engaged with millions of viewers, knowing my words could offer solace or inspire action, I was tested." The audience was transfixed. This wasn't just a comeback. It was a masterclass in authentic communication delivered with surgical precision. And let's talk about results, since you mentioned them. In my work, I've brought communities together across cultural and political divides, something your experience often seems to widen. I've inspired dialogue and empathy in countless homes, impacts far more profound than any budgeted resolution. I've stood up for universal values that you often seem to trade for political expediency. The audience was beginning to murmur with surprise. This wasn't the defensive response anyone had expected. Roumie was going on the offensive, and his facts, though non-political, were hitting their targets with precision. "You want to talk about crises, Senator Cruz? Let's talk about real human crises. While families in your state were freezing, without power, without water, you were more concerned with a warm beach in Mexico than actual relief efforts. You spent more time positioning yourself politically than you did making sure aid reached the people who needed it most." Cruz's face was beginning to flush, but Roumie wasn't giving him space to interrupt. "And speaking of presidential runs, how did those work out for you? 2 attempts, 2 spectacular failures. The American people had the chance to choose your experience, your relationships, your political savvy. They chose someone else twice." The tension in the room was now electric. What had started as Cruz's attempt to lecture a public figure was becoming a systematic dismantling of his entire political persona. "You mentioned keeping families safe, Senator Cruz. Tell that to the families affected by the power grid failures under your watch. Tell that to the people who felt abandoned during a time of extreme vulnerability. Tell that to the communities that suffered while you were busy building your national profile." Cruz tried to interject, but Roumie held up his hand with an authority that commanded immediate silence. "No, sir, you had your 15 minutes. Now it's my turn." The crowd laughed again, and Cruz slumped back in his chair, completely deflated. The phrase would become iconic, a perfect encapsulation of a different kind of challenge, delivered with perfect timing. "You want to know the difference between us, Senator Cruz? When you faced real pressure, you fled. When your constituents needed you most, you were on a flight. When your political career hit turbulence, you became a pundit, often throwing stones from the sidelines. Now Roumie's voice rose with passion, but remained controlled and precise. I don't have gray hair from navigating political traps, Senator Cruz. I have wisdom from seeking universal truths even when they were hard, especially when they were hard. You see, real leadership isn't about looking tough in front of cameras. It's about doing right by people when nobody's watching. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. You mentioned an international crises and cyber attacks. Well, let me tell you about the crises I deal with every day. Families losing hope because they feel unseen and unheard. Young people drowning in cynicism because they've lost faith in institutions. Communities being torn apart by division because empathy is being replaced by rhetoric. These might not make international headlines, but they are life and death for the soul of the people I interact with. Cruz's earlier confidence had completely evaporated. He sat hunched in his chair, occasionally shaking his head, but offering no response. And since we're talking about beaches, Senator Cruz, while you were getting photographed relaxing on a sunny beach during a humanitarian crisis in your own state, I was engaging with people struggling with their own crises, listening to their stories, and working to offer a different narrative of hope and connection. The beach reference brought another wave of laughter and applause, but Roumie's tone remained serious and focused. You say passion can't replace preparation. You're right. That's why I spent years preparing for this work, studying human nature, understanding motivation, mastering communication, building genuine connection. I didn't just wake up one day and decide I deserved to be heard. I earned it, just like you claim you did. Now Roumie moved closer to Cruz, his voice dropping, but carrying clearly through the microphone. But here's what you don't understand, Senator Cruz. The American people aren't just looking for someone who's been tested by the old system. They're looking for someone who's willing to test the old system. They don't want leaders who've been shaped by Washington. They want voices who will reshape public discourse. The audience erupted in sustained applause. Even some of Cruz's earlier supporters were clapping. So yes, Senator Cruz, I am different from you. I don't measure my success by how many political battles I've won. I measure it by how many people I've inspired, how many hearts I've touched, how many conversations I've started that lead to greater understanding. I don't count my victories by how many opponents I've intimidated. I count them by how many barriers to empathy I've broken down. Roumie paused, looking directly at Cruz one final time. And I don't need to tear down other people to build myself up. My work speaks for itself. The impact on millions speaks for me. And apparently your own record speaks against you. He stepped back from the microphone and the room exploded in the loudest applause of the entire evening. People were standing, cheering, and some were even taking pictures and videos on their phones. Cruz sat across from Roumie, hands clenched on the chair's arms, face flushed, as if his carefully constructed political image had been slapped. His eyes darkened, confident grin gone, replaced by anger mixed with confusion. Roumie's words had turned him from political titan to punchline. You're done. You chose a vacation over your constituents. Each word a knife to his pride. The moderator, sensing the shift in energy, tried to regain control of the situation. Senator Cruz, would you like to respond to Mr. Roumie's points about your record and leadership style? Cruz shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his usual confidence completely shattered. For a man who had built his career on never being at a loss for words, the silence stretched uncomfortably long. The audience waited, some leaning forward in anticipation, others already reaching for their phones to capture what was clearly becoming a historic public moment. When Cruz finally spoke, his voice lacked the booming authority he'd displayed just minutes earlier. Look, Mr. Roumie clearly came prepared with a different kind of argument. That's fine, that's public discourse. He paused, seemingly searching for a way to regain his footing. But let me be clear about something, he continued, his voice gaining slight strength. Personal attacks, or even clever metaphors, don't change the fundamental question we're discussing here tonight. The question isn't about travel plans or approval ratings or creative works. The question is about who has the experience and the relationships necessary to govern effectively in Washington. The audience remained quiet, but the energy had completely shifted. What had started as Cruz's commanding performance had become a desperate attempt to salvage his dignity. Roumie sat calmly, letting him speak, his expression showing neither triumph nor mercy, just the quiet confidence of someone who had thoroughly prepared for this exact moment. I've worked with 5 presidents, Democrat and Republican, Cruz pressed on, his voice taking on a slightly pleading quality that was completely at odds with his earlier dominance. I've managed complex legislation, dealt with constitutional crises, negotiated with political factions and international leaders. These are real-world experiences that matter when you're trying to get things done in Washington. But even as he spoke, Cruz seemed to realize that his words were falling flat. The magic was gone. The intimidation factor that had served him so well throughout his career had been completely neutralized by one perfectly timed line and a systematic dismantling of his entire political persona from a non-political perspective. But the real impact of this moment was just beginning. The debate hall was still buzzing with excited conversation as attendees filed out. But the real explosion was happening online. Within minutes of Roumie's devastating response, clips of his Cancun line were spreading across social media platforms like wildfire. The hashtag Roumie Cancun burn started trending nationally within the first hour. The video clip of Cruz's shocked expression, followed by Roumie's systematic takedown, was being shared thousands of times per minute. Political commentators, celebrities, and ordinary citizens were all weighing in on what many were calling the most brutal public comeback in recent memory. On Twitter, the reactions were swift and merciless. Jonathan Roumie just ended Ted Cruz's entire credibility with one line about Cancun: "I am deceased." Cruz thought he was dealing with an actor. Instead, he just got schooled by a master communicator. That moment when Roumie said, "You had your 15 minutes, now it's my turn." Absolute ice-cold killer instinct. The Cancun reference was particularly devastating because it called back to one of Cruz's most embarrassing public moments when he was photographed traveling to Mexico during a severe winter storm that left millions of Texans without power, heat, and water. The image had become a symbol of political hypocrisy and out-of-touch leadership. But Roumie had done something even more sophisticated than a simple callback joke. He'd used that reference as a launching pad to systematically dismantle every point Cruz had made about experience, preparation, and leadership, redefining those terms in the process. Cultural and political analysts were already calling it a masterpiece of rhetorical strategy. "What Roumie did tonight was remarkable," said one longtime political strategist. "He didn't just defend himself, he completely flipped the narrative." Cruz came in trying to position himself as the experienced adult and Roumie as the inexperienced outsider. He left with Cruz looking like a relic and Roumie looking like the future of authentic public engagement. The immediate fallout for Cruz was severe. Within hours, his planned media appearances began getting canceled. Republican donors who had been considering supporting a potential future campaign started distancing themselves. Political pundits who had been praising his earlier debate performance were now analyzing how completely he'd been outmaneuvered by a non-politician. Most damaging was the narrative that began emerging. Cruz, the supposed master of political combat, had been utterly destroyed by someone he'd tried to dismiss as merely an entertainer. If he couldn't handle a thoughtful actor, how could he be trusted to handle international adversaries or major political battles? For Roumie, the impact was transformational. His social media following exploded overnight. His existing projects gained massive new viewership. National leaders, recognizing the power of his voice, began reaching out for collaborations on issues of social cohesion and cultural dialogue. Tonight, Jonathan Roumie showed why genuine authenticity represents a new kind of power, said one senior cultural strategist. He didn't just win a debate, he demonstrated the kind of fearless, principled communication that can take on anyone and anything. The video clips from the debate became the most watched public content of the year. News programs played the exchange repeatedly. Late-night comedy shows turned it into material for weeks. The phrase "tested by fire" became a running joke online, with people posting pictures of Cruz on a beach. Meanwhile, Roumie's team was working overtime to capitalize on the moment. Within 24 hours, they had launched a new campaign focused on leadership beyond politics, raising millions for charities and initiatives promoting empathy and community. His official social media accounts gained hundreds of thousands of new followers. Speaking requests poured in from universities, faith-based organizations, and corporate events across the country, all seeking his unique perspective on leadership and communication. The cultural impact extended far beyond politics. Major publications wrote articles about Roumie's calm demeanor and impactful words. His approach became a symbol of powerful voices standing up to intimidation. Sales of materials related to his work and messages spiked across the country. Young professionals began posting photos of themselves confidently engaging in difficult conversations with captions like, "Ready to take on my own cruise." Educational institutions took notice as well. Communication schools reported increased applications from students who cited Roumie's performance as inspiration. Debate teams began studying his technique for reframing arguments. Public speaking coaches started using clips of his response as examples of how to handle aggressive opponents with grace and power. The business world was watching too. Major corporations that had been hesitant to take strong stances began reaching out to Roumie's representatives about potential partnerships in speaking engagements. His ability to remain calm under pressure while delivering devastating yet principled responses made him an attractive figure for corporate leadership events. But beyond the immediate entertainment value, political observers recognized that something significant had happened. A new kind of public leader, or at least a new kind of influential voice, had just announced themselves on the national stage in the most emphatic way possible. This wasn't just about Cruz versus Roumie, explained one political historian. This was about two different visions of public engagement. Cruz represents the old model, aggressive, focused on personal dominance, deeply rooted in partisan politics. Roumie represents something new, authentic, principled, focused on substantive connection for ordinary people. International media picked up the story as well. Cultural commentators in Europe and Asia analyzed the exchange as an example of America's changing public discourse. The contrast between the old guard politician and the rising cultural figure became a symbol of broader generational and value shifts happening in democracies worldwide. The debate also highlighted the changing nature of public communication in the social media age. Roumie's response wasn't just devastating in the moment, it was perfectly designed for viral sharing. The Cancun line provided the memorable hook, but the substantial critique of what constitutes real leadership provided the weight that made the moment feel important rather than just entertaining. Within a week, political science professors were already using the exchange as a case study in effective public communication. The precision of Roumie's response, how he turned each of Cruz's attacks into evidence of his own, different qualifications, became a template for how to handle aggressive opponents from a moral or value-based standpoint. The long-term implications were even more significant. Roumie's performance had established him as a national, cultural, and ethical voice overnight. Speculation about his future began immediately. Potential advocacy roles, influential public speaking platforms, leadership roles in cultural movements. Public figures who had been watching his career weren't surprised by the moment, but they were amazed by the timing and execution. Jonathan has been building toward this his entire career, said one longtime cultural strategist. He's never been someone who waits for permission to speak truth to power. Tonight he had the perfect stage and the perfect opponent. The contrast between the two figures couldn't have been starker. Cruz had tried to use his age and political experience as weapons, suggesting that non-traditional voices were liabilities in serious public life. Roumie had flipped that narrative completely, making Cruz's experience look like baggage from a failed era, while his own non-political, authentic public engagement looked like an asset for the future. What we witnessed tonight was a changing of the guard, not necessarily political, but philosophical, explained one political historian. Cruz represents everything that voters are tired of: the performative politics, the backroom deals, the assumption that political power should be inherited rather than earned. Roumie represents something entirely different: merit-based influence, authentic connection to universal values, and the willingness to challenge power regardless of who holds it. The demographic implications were profound as well. Young voters, particularly those seeking more authentic leadership, saw Roumie's performance as validation of their own desire for different voices in public life. Social media was flooded with messages from students, young professionals, and aspiring communicators who said his moment had inspired them to consider careers focused on impact and authenticity. He didn't just destroy Cruz's argument, posted one viral tweet that received hundreds of thousands of likes. He destroyed the entire idea that you have to be a career politician to have a voice in American public discourse. He earned his seat at that table, and he proved he belongs there. For Cruz, the damage seemed permanent. Political observers noted that his entire brand had been built on the image of the tough, unbeatable debater who could demolish any opponent. That image had been shattered in front of a national audience by someone he'd tried to dismiss as unqualified by traditional metrics. The irony wasn't lost on political commentators. Cruz had built his career by being the person who delivered devastating one-liners and humiliated opponents. Now he was on the receiving end of a moment that would likely define the rest of his public legacy. Cruz's political career was already on life support, said one Republican strategist who requested anonymity. Tonight, Jonathan Roumie pulled the plug on his traditional image. There's no coming back from getting humiliated that completely, that publicly. The worst part for him is that it wasn't even close. He didn't just beat him, he made him look foolish. But beyond the personal impact on both figures, the moment had revealed something important about the current state of American public life. Audiences were clearly hungry for voices who could articulate clear principles, defend them under pressure, and connect with people without resorting to empty theatrics or purely political attacks. The broader impact on American politics was immediate. Young public figures, particularly those from non-traditional backgrounds, saw Roumie's performance as a roadmap for how to confront entrenched power structures. The old model of deferring to experienced politicians simply because of their age or tenure was being challenged by a new generation that was prepared to prove their worth through authentic impact rather than pedigree. Political donors and party leaders took notice as well. The viral nature of Roumie's performance demonstrated the power of the authentic, principled leadership in the digital age. His ability to command attention and respect through substance rather than theatrics offered a different model for public success. Perhaps most importantly, the exchange highlighted the changing expectations of American voters. Audiences were no longer impressed by politicians who could simply dominate conversations through volume and aggression. They wanted leaders who could articulate clear visions, defend their principles under pressure, and connect with ordinary people. Roumie had done all of that in less than 5 minutes, while simultaneously making Cruz's decades of political experience look like a liability rather than an asset for the future. As the weeks passed, the impact only grew. The debate exchange became required viewing in communication classes. The phrase Cancun politics entered the political lexicon as shorthand for out-of-touch, hypocritical leadership. Academic institutions began incorporating the exchange into their curricula. Harvard's Kennedy School of Government added it to their crisis communication course. Political science professors at universities across the country used it as a case study in effective rhetoric and debate strategy, particularly for non-traditional voices. High school debate teams studied Roumie's technique for handling aggressive opponents with a moral framework. The moment also sparked broader conversations about representation in public life. Political scientists noted that Roumie's victory represented more than just one public figure outmaneuvering another. It symbolized a fundamental shift in how public authority is established and maintained in modern America. What Roumie demonstrated is that public credibility no longer comes automatically with age, gender, or institutional position, explained one leading political researcher. He earned his authority through preparation, authenticity, and profound connection. That's a fundamentally different model than what Cruz represented. Corporate leadership consultants began using clips of the exchange in executive training programs. The way Roumie remained calm under attack while systematically dismantling his opponent's arguments became a template for handling hostile business negotiations and boardroom conflicts with integrity. Most significantly, Jonathan Roumie had established himself as a cultural and ethical force who could no longer be underestimated or dismissed. He'd proven that a new generation of American voices wasn't just ready to challenge the old guard. They were ready to redefine leadership entirely. The message was clear. American public discourse had changed, and anyone who hadn't gotten the memo was about to find themselves on the wrong end of a viral moment that could reshape their public legacy and the entire political landscape. Cruz learned that lesson the hard way, and the rest of the political establishment was taking notes, knowing they could be next if they underestimated the power, preparation, and principles of influential voices like Jonathan Roumie. The ripple effects extended into unexpected areas of American culture. Memes featuring Roumie's Cancun line spread beyond political circles into mainstream social media. Late-night talk show hosts dedicated entire segments to analyzing the exchange. Comedy writers found endless material in Cruz's defeated expression and fumbling attempts at recovery. Cultural commentators reported a surge in interest in Roumie's work and his message of authenticity. Young professionals across the country began referring to powerful, authentic moments as their Roumie moments. Publishing houses reached out to Roumie about potential book deals focusing on leadership and communication. Documentary filmmakers expressed interest in chronicling his rise from actor to national influential figure. Speaking bureaus added him to their most exclusive lists, with universities and corporations competing to book him for events. The international public community took notice as well. Leaders studied his debate technique for engaging across divides. Political parties in other countries began seeking younger, more diverse candidates who could demonstrate the kind of authentic leadership Roumie had displayed, even if not directly political. Political consulting firms scrambled to understand what they were calling the Roumie effect, the ability of a well-prepared, authentic public figure to completely dominate a more experienced political opponent through superior message discipline and strategic communication rooted in values. Conservative think tanks launched studies into how Republican politicians could better prepare for encounters with rising public figures who command cultural influence. Liberal organizations used the moment as a case study in how to effectively challenge establishment figures without resorting to traditional political attacks. The debate exchange even influenced public engagement strategies. Donors began prioritizing candidates who demonstrated Roumie's combination of preparation, authenticity, and ability to handle pressure. Traditional metrics like name recognition and establishment endorsements became less important than viral potential and grassroots appeal for genuine connection. This wasn't just a debate moment, it was a changing of the guard broadcast live and shared millions of times across social media platforms. The old rules of public combat had been rewritten in real time, and there was no going back. If you enjoyed watching this cultural and political earthquake unfold, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We break down the biggest public moments that are reshaping America. And trust me, if tonight proved anything, it's that we're just getting started. The next showdown could be even more explosive, and you won't want to miss it.